It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, former Cabinet Minister Damien Green, former Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett, Liverpool Echo political editor Liam Thorpe and political strategist Jo Tanner. Today, lockdown eases in England, Wales and Scotland.
It's been a bit of a cliffhanger, but we're really super excited that we can come.
You can socialise indoors as well as flying to some destinations. But ministers and scientists don't sound entirely upbeat.
Fantastic news that we're reopening, but do exercise some caution.
I do believe people, all of us, need to be really, really careful.
Thousands more are being vaccinated in areas hit by the Indian variant. That's led to calls for jabs to be offered to younger people.
I'm hoping the government does move to allow younger Londoners in those parts of the city where we're concerned to receive the vaccine sooner.
The Northern Ireland Protocol has proven to be a massive challenge for us.
What will the new leader of the DUP do about it? Let's start with, of course, today being the big reopening, as you heard in the headlines, in England, Wales and most of Scotland. Let's take a look at a couple of the paper headlines. The Daily Mail has "Don't Blow It, Britain." Let's take a look at the Mirror and how they are covering it on their front page. At last, it's Freedom Day. Happy hours for now. So, yes, big reopening. Limited groups of people can now meet and socialise indoors. Pubs, restaurants and cinemas open their doors, many of them for the first time. But the easing of restrictions comes with a huge dose of caution from ministers. So you can do lots of things today, that you couldn't do before. But will you, Damien?
Yes, by and large. I think it's sensible that the government has been cautious. It's been criticised for being too cautious, but actually the fact that this new slight cloud of the horizon of the Indian variant has emerged reminds us that while, of course, it's great to have all these things open again and we all want to do it, we all need to behave sensibly. And if we do that, we can carry on and get the final step in June that we're all looking forward to. So I think people should enjoy today, but enjoy it cautiously. Right,
Margaret, what about you? You can do lots of things you couldn't before. Are you going to take up that opportunity?
Well, we're not likely to, because at the moment we're shielding still. But I mean, every encouragement to everybody who can. Fortunately, I don't know about, it wasn't true probably everywhere, but here we had quite good weather over the first weekend when people could go and sit outside. So the pub near us, you know, people were very happily sitting in the sunshine. But given the weather today, I think it's a good thing they can go indoors.
Yes, I'm sure lots of people will be very relieved they can sit indoors rather than perhaps freezing or in the wet with umbrellas outdoors. The Prime Minister has said the roadmap, Liam and Jo, is irreversible. But we've heard from ministers, but they may not be able to lift all of the legal restrictions on June the 21st. Now, that is a tricky message for government to communicate to the public, Liam.
Very tricky, and I think he's been slightly hamstrung by his data not dates announcement that he did, because he obviously did put a lot of dates in it, and I think it's human nature for everyone to be looking towards that June 21st date. Me personally, I'm supposed to be getting married in September, so there's people like us who are waiting to make these big life decisions, but we don't know what's going to happen. And I think he struck quite a sort of concerned tone, Boris Johnson, on at the last press conference, when he was pretty much sort of putting a mark in the sand, saying there is probably a good chance that we won't be able to open up fully on June 21st. But unfortunately, I have to say, I think that this is largely of the government's own making when you look at the delay in terms of putting India on the red list. And that's obviously created this latest problem, which is, as Damien says, is a reminder that COVID can come back quite strongly, but it seems to be able to come back easier when we once again see our government failing to make the right decisions at the right time. Well,
Liam, we hope your wedding goes ahead as planned in September. Jo, what do you think about the tricky messaging problem for the government?
I think they are between a rock and a hard place, aren't they? Let's face it. I mean, there's Boris Johnson is naturally very optimistic and has wanted to be all through this, and I think that's part of the problem. He's wanted to show that we're on course and that we are moving towards something. He wants to give people hope. If you want to get the economy moving, you need to encourage people to go out and book stuff. I think typically the British weather will probably mean we're about to head into a heat wave just as we're all able to be inside. It will just be, it's a bit like bank holidays tend to always work the opposite for us in terms of the weather that's desired. So I think in reality it's a very, very difficult position, but I think ultimately the government has got to keep persuading people to do things, plan for things, but also needs to hope that businesses are also ready to modify their plans should the government have a difficult message it has to deliver.
Right, now the reason partly for the abundance of caution is this transmissibility of the Indian variant in particular parts of the country. Liam, let's have a look inside the Liverpool Echo, your paper. Sefton COVID rates falling after action to contain India variant. Now, is that as a result of surge testing? It's working, it suggests.
There's a very good chance of that, yeah. We know that there was a couple of weeks ago we were starting to see this doubling and tripling in some places of the variant, of the cases because of that India variant. It looks like a lot of action has been taken very quickly on the ground, which is good. Local public health teams have been getting surge testing out there, and we have seen some ramped up vaccinations as well. We've had school classes sent home to isolate. All the schools seem to know exactly what they're doing now. I think that's a big factor as well. You know, rather than compared to a year ago, individual businesses, schools, things like that are very quick and know what to do. So, yeah, we've seen those cases falling today. We've just done the latest update on that, and that's a really important moment for a place like Sefton because it was starting to go quite quickly in the wrong direction. So I think quick action, surge testing and people doing the right things has had a really positive impact there. And let's hope that we keep seeing those numbers fall.
Well, and as you indicated, there's been some sort of ramping up of vaccination. I think we can show pictures of people queuing for vaccinations in Bolton over the weekend, another area where they have seen the Indian variant beginning to spread. Now, the impact of the Indian variant on the number of cases is not yet known. I think we're going to have to wait a few weeks for that, but it did emerge at the weekend, according to the Health Secretary, that 18 people in hospital in Bolton with COVID that he talked about were unvaccinated despite being eligible for the jab. This tweet from Mark Harper, a Conservative MP, lockdown sceptic to some extent from the COVID recovery group, saying, concerning to hear government is entertaining the delay of the 21st of June unlocking, causing massive problems for many people's livelihoods because some people won't have a jab. Wider society's fate can't be sealed by the actions of a small group of people, whatever their reasoning. Do you agree with him, Damien?
Almost. I mean, I agree that you shouldn't delay reopening on the basis of a small minority who have been offered the vaccine and haven't taken it. That would have mean a very small, irresponsible tail wagging a very large, responsible dog, which is the vast majority of the rest of us who are taking the vaccine. But I don't. The reason I don't entirely agree with Mark is that I don't think the government has said that. The government has said that it will stick to its 4 tests, which it stuck to all along with this roadmap. Now, one of those tests, probably the key one in this case, is going to be the number of people going into hospital. And as I understand it, listening to the scientists over the weekend, the thought is that the vaccines are effective against this Indian variant, in which case the best thing anyone can do is to get vaccinated. I think we've all talked about doing the right thing. That's the right thing to do now.
Right, but there's quite a big question there at the heart of this, isn't there, Margaret? What Mark Harper's suggesting is that the further easing of lockdown shouldn't be threatened by people who aren't vaccinated when they could be. Or does the government have a duty to protect everybody, vaccinated or not?
It sounds a little bit like leaping to judgments too quickly. I mean, it may be that in that particular area, the people who have been caught have not been vaccinated. I don't know whether it's clear that they've all chosen not to be vaccinated or whether they just weren't in the age group or the cohort for some reason where it was allowed. But I think we need to get a little bit more information and not leap to conclusions on the basis of the first few cases.
Jo?
Yeah, I think Margaret raises an important point there. I think we don't know, but at the same time, we don't know, for example, whether there are issues locally when vaccinations are offered, whether there's, quite frankly, cock-ups, problems, mistakes, challenges that we are not aware of when we sit in a studio like this. So there is a degree of local issues, local factors could be a problem, but the government are also having to do some really deep dives around particular groups, whether there are, different attitudes or concerns about the vaccine that do have to be addressed. I mean, I think on a weekly basis I meet somebody who says that they're not keen on having it, and you try and reason with them, but ultimately lots of people have different reasons if they do choose not to have a vaccine.
Liam?
Yeah, I mean, we did see some encouraging reports from over the weekend in Bolton. I think it was sort of 6,000 extra vaccines taken up. Many of those amongst the age groups who had previously been offered, who perhaps either had turned it down or for whatever reason, like Jo says, hadn't had one, they were now coming forward. So I don't think this attitude that I heard from Mr. Harper is particularly good, where it's sort of framing certain groups. I think what we need to do is work on encouraging everybody to come forward and get vaccinated, even if they do have some concerns, because frankly, it's in all of our interests, isn't it? So that's encouraging science from Bolton. We just need to keep getting the word out. And obviously, I think the India variant potentially has kind of expedited that a little bit. People maybe saw what was going on and thought, actually, this is a really concerning situation, so everyone should come forward for a vaccine.
Now, what about the debate that now seems to be raging in parts of the country about whether younger people should be vaccinated earlier or sooner? There seems to be some divergence between the advice on the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations. They're pushing for speeding up second jabs for the older age groups, people like me. But some local authorities are calling for those younger people to be vaccinated in areas like Bolton and perhaps Sefton too. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, has also called for younger Londoners in 5 boroughs to be vaccinated. Damien, what do you think? Because the government is saying we should stick to what the JCVI is suggesting.
Looking at the JCVI's success rate through the vaccination programme, I think we should listen to them rather than to politicians, because they fought off, if you like, an earlier claim of, OK, well, let's vaccinate all the police, let's vaccinate shop workers, and a lot of people could make a perfectly good case for jumping the queue effectively. But the JCVI is stuck all the way along to saying the more vulnerable people you vaccinate earlier, at the end, the fewer deaths you will have. And looking at the figures for the past couple of months, that looks like exactly the right strategy. So I would be extremely reluctant to go away from that strategy now.
Margaret?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. They have a good track record, that committee. But, obviously, do as much as you can, as fast as you can.
Liam?
I mean, it's not just politicians who are calling for this. We've got local directors of public health in those specific areas calling for it as well. And I really can see the argument for something like Bolton or Blackburn, where it's spreading amongst younger people. We know that, we've seen that. And I can see an argument, again, as a kind of wider benefit for ramping up vaccinations in younger people in those specific areas. Not across the board, because across the board you still want to stick to that general plan. But I think if there's the capability to potentially vaccinate younger people in areas to stop, for example, the India variant kind of getting out of control, particularly at a time when we're now opening restrictions and we know that there's going to probably be more and more young people mixing together in those areas, I think that it could make sense.
Right. Well, what do you think, Damien? Particularly since some local authorities are actually, I think, going ahead and doing it anyway, if they think that's where the transmissibility is amongst unvaccinated younger age groups. I
mean, the problem is you have to balance the fact that if you're going to do that, then that is vaccines that are not going to be available for older and more vulnerable people, or people in other groups that are vulnerable. So that's the choice you're making. If that choice ends up with more people in hospital and more people dying, then that would be the wrong choice. I think, and yeah, absolutely, I agree with Margaret that the key is to keep this hugely successful vaccination programme rolling out as fast as possible. That in the end is the key to getting us out from under this pandemic.
Jo?
Yeah, and I think there are other measures, aren't there? I mean, my son is 12 years old and he's in the group where today they don't have to wear masks at school. And we are not in an area where there has been any concern about a variant, but he is in school wearing a mask today because his school have taken the decision to still wear a mask. So there are other measures that can still be put in place, or in certain situations can happen, that will help protect people even more if need be. And I think the idea of looking at local restrictions and local differences is also the other thing that we do, so that we don't then put more vulnerable people at risk.
Right, local restrictions. Margaret, what about local lockdowns? I mean, the spectre of that hasn't gone down very well in areas, particularly where they have been under lockdown, some form or another, for longer than other parts of the country.
I think part of the lesson of this pandemic is you never say never to anything. But on the other hand, local lockdowns have had a very, very varied impact. And I can't help thinking, I mean, nobody talks about it anymore, but if you remember, Leicester as an area was locked down for what seemed like ages. and it didn't seem to make as much difference as one would have hoped to the outcomes. And, you know, if it's a local lockdown, it's so easy for people to just go 2 streets away or whatever. So, as I say, I don't say never. There may be a point when, for some particular reason, in some particular area, it seems like a contribution, but I wouldn't rely on it.
Liam, you were nodding there.
Yeah, I mean, we've got pretty painful experience of this in Merseyside. You'll remember that in December, we were one of the few areas that went into Tier 2, where everywhere else around us stayed in Tier 3. And as Margaret says, all that happened was everyone came here. You know, people came from all over to Liverpool and to the Liverpool City region because there wasn't really any way of policing that. People were tired of being in lockdown, and they came into areas where they could socialise and do leisure activities. So for that reason, I know that local public health directors in this neck of the woods are really sort of concerned about the idea of bringing that in again. Obviously, as Margaret said, you can't rule it out if things get really serious, but people I've spoken to are much more interested in the idea of ramping up vaccinations rather than any kind of new local measures. Because you remember, as Margaret said, places like Leicester, places like Greater Manchester, we're in lockdown most of last year, and people are absolutely sick of that.
All right, well, let's leave it there on the day of the big reopening, certainly across most parts of the UK. We're going to talk about Northern Ireland and welcome our BBC's Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy, because the election of Edwin Poots as the new leader of the DUP happened at the beginning of the weekend. Now, many people may be familiar with his predecessor, Arlene Foster, but not him. Who is he, Emma?
His name a lot more in future. He's come in to make a big shake-up in the DUP. He's currently looking at who's going to be his new sort of ministerial positions, but crucially, he has pitched himself as the man to go forward and oppose the Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, he is seen as somebody from the very traditional side of the party. He's been in politics for 3 decades with the DUP. His father was one of the founding members. And he has pitched himself by saying, look, you know, one of the things that led to Arlene Foster's downfall was the fact perception she perhaps wasn't tough enough on the new Brexit arrangements. He's going to come in, shake things up in the party, and says the biggest issue for him is trying to get rid of the Northern Ireland Protocol and kind of turn the clock back when it comes to the new border in the Irish Sea and all the new changes that have come in as a result of Brexit for Northern Ireland.
Right, so it is a priority. We understand that, the Northern Ireland Protocol. He said it's a challenge at the very least. But remind us why it is such a problem or issue for the DUP.
Well, look, for Unionists in Northern Ireland, being part of the United Kingdom is really at the heart of their political outlook. What Brexit has done, and the Northern Ireland Protocol, has put this new line of separation down the Irish Sea, as they see it, a new line of separation between Britain and Northern Ireland. And for many Unionists, that's a really uncomfortable position. They see that perhaps as even Northern Ireland's future in the UK as being under threat. Now, not liking it and what you can do about it are 2 different things, because, of course, it is part of the treaty that Boris Johnson signed with the EU. Right.
And what can he actually do about it then, Edwin Poots?
Well, look, he looks like he's going to be tackling this in a few different ways. There's current legal challenges being mounted against the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's one aspect of it. On the other hand, he's looking to be also disruptive when it comes to this. He's already done that as the Minister for Agriculture here, and because his department has been in charge of the new border checks and the new border posts. One of the things he's already done previously was to halt work on the new border control posts, the new structures there, to kind of disrupt that process and say, well, we're against it. We don't want to be the ones who are implementing it. And the other sort of disruptive tactics, if you like, that is going to happen going forward and has already begun is that the DUP says it's not going to cooperate with certain what we call here north-south meetings. So those are the kind of meetings that go on. You don't always hear much about them, but that's where the Northern Ireland government in Stormont cooperates with the Irish government for all island things, like things on agriculture or tourism or transport, things where it makes sense to work together as one island. The DUP says, well, look, we're not going to play ball on things like that if you're not helping us sort out the problems east-west over the Irish Sea. OK, thank you very much, Emma Vardy there. We can talk to Ian Paisley, MP for the DUP. Of course, he's also in Belfast. Hello to you, Ian. What would you like Edwin Poots to do about the Northern Ireland Protocol? We've heard some of the options, but what would you like to see him do?
Well, I think Emma Vardy has actually summarised the situation exceptionally well. The protocol has caused seismic society upheaval, seismic political upheaval and seismic economic chaos. And under the terms of the protocol, Article 16 of the protocol, if those seismic societal chaoses continue, the government can set the protocol aside. Now, we saw within the first 2 weeks of the operation of the protocol, when it didn't suit the Irish government, they were prepared to do that on the issue of vaccines. This is now causing us major society problems in Northern Ireland. It's disrupting our politics in terms of east-west, north-south and inter-community relations in Northern Ireland. We've seen the terrible scenes occurring in some places. Those things have got to be calmed, and the only way we can calm that is for the real British government policy to stand up. On the one hand, we're told by Boris Johnson that they should be able to bin these arrangements if they don't work, and we're also told, quite encouragingly, by Lord Frost that this policy is no longer sustainable. So we're saying, put meat on that bone and fix it.
Right.
And fix it fast.
Right. Well, you've mentioned Lord Frost and what he said. Let's just show our viewers that he's appearing in front of MPs today. He will be questioned, no doubt, about the Northern Ireland Protocol and how it's working. He said in an interview in the Mail on Sunday, the EU must stop point scoring and work with us to protect the peace. He goes on to say, as you alluded to, if the protocol operates so as to damage the political, social or economic fabric of life in Northern Ireland, then that situation cannot be sustained for long. Do you trust Lord Frost to change the protocol?
Well, I'm very encouraged by what he's saying, but then I've been very encouraged by what Boris has said or what the Prime Minister has said from time to time. What we've got to see is not just words, but actions. And we're prepared to give the government the space to action this and to get it right, because this affects everybody in Northern Ireland, not just unionists, but nationalists, the entire community, and it's got to be got right for our economic sustainability and for our society sustainability and stability. These things have got to be put right. So let's create the space to now allow this to happen. And, you know, the clock is ticking, so he's got to move fast. I know that Edmund Poots will be meeting with Lord Frost very, very soon. He will see the Secretary of State in the next 24 hours also. He will make these points very pointedly to him. But, you know, coming down the tracks, we have a medicines regulation coming down the tracks as a result of the protocol. So every single medicine, from paracetamol to vaccine, coming into Northern Ireland will have to pass 3 standardised checks. That's not acceptable. This will create even more chaos, so it needs to be fixed really fast.
All right, Ian, stay there with us while we go to the other guest. Damien, listening to all of that, what is the real government policy when it comes to the protocol? Is it to continue supporting it?
The government policy is to continue to support the Good Friday Agreement, which lies behind the peace that, by and large, we've seen in Northern Ireland for a couple of decades now, thank God, after what went before. But at the same time, to accept that the EU wants to preserve the integrity of the single market, and the way to achieve those things at once may well be to change the protocol, but it will only be changed, it is much better, indeed it's only possible to be changed by agreement. So people need to keep talking about that, so that the practical problems that Ian has just mentioned can be got rid of.
Right, well, I mean, listening to Ian, they sound more than practical problems. He says there's been a seismic upheaval. Do you regret voting in favour of the protocol, Damien?
No, because where we were, where the entirety of the Brexit negotiations were stalled, we are in a better place now. The fact that we've got a Brexit deal, the fact that we're able to talk about bits of it now in a civilised way, that's a good thing. But I absolutely get the point that people in Northern Ireland who are finding that their shops may not be full of goods that they want to buy, that they've been able to buy for a long time because of customs problems between Britain, between Great Britain and another part of the United Kingdom. Yes. That's clearly unacceptable. And I'm absolutely sure David Frost, in that article you quoted from, made a very good point that, frankly, goods going from Britain to Ireland, so therefore one part of Great Britain to another part of Great Britain, shouldn't be treated the same way as a consignment of goods coming from China into Rotterdam. And the EU ought to be able to recognise that as a practical change.
Right, but Ian, broadly speaking, you've just heard what Damien said. It's a good thing, the Northern Ireland Protocol.
It's not a good thing. Look, Brexit has got to mean Brexit for all of the UK in the same way. And let me tackle 2 points that Damien has mentioned. First of all, he says he wants to support the Belfast Agreement or Good Friday Agreement. The protocol systematically undermines the Belfast Agreement because it takes away the issue of consent from the people of Northern Ireland. So if you support the protocol, you can't say you're endorsing the Belfast Agreement, a point which is missed many, many times by our commentators. And secondly, he says that it has to be changed by agreement. Under the protocol itself, please read it. Section 16, it can be removed unilaterally if there is societal, economic, or political upheavals caused by it. The Irish government was prepared to intervene unilaterally. Please find your spine and intervene for the sake of the people of Northern Ireland, because it was the people of Northern Ireland delivered Brexit for you with our votes.
Damien?
It's not a question of finding a spine and tearing up agreements. It would be much better if we can tone down the rhetoric and actually reach agreement. The Irish government, well, the EU did think of invoking Article 16, but then didn't, had an outburst of common sense. And
they did invoke it and had to uninvoke it.
Well, but it didn't happen. It's still in operation.
For a period of 7 hours.
Yeah, okay.
It actually happened.
Yeah, okay. But then it unhappened, and that was, as I say, an outbreak of common sense happened. And I would hope that we can achieve that again, because that will be hugely in the interests of everyone.
Right. Can I bring in Margaret here? Because
Damon, I would appeal to you. I would appeal to your government. If you think you can tweak your way out of this, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. This has got to be fixed. And the only way it will fix is if the government has the courage that it claimed it had way back in October 2019, that it would deliver the Brexit for all of the people of the United Kingdom. So tweaking this isn't going to fix it. It's just going to cause more societal upheavals. So grasp the nettle now and fix it.
Right. Well, Margaret, do you agree with Ian Paisley and David Frost, actually, that it's up to the EU also to fix this?
Well, obviously the EU has to be involved because it's part of a treaty with the EU. But our Shadow Secretary of State has said that it's time for the Prime Minister personally to get involved in trying to sort this out. And I say, because a very heavy responsibility lies on the Prime Minister for this mess being created in the first place. I don't blame the DUP for being incensed about this, because Boris Johnson, before he was the Prime Minister, went to their party conference and promised them that there was no way he would agree to any such arrangement, which is enshrined in the protocol, and then he went away and negotiated it and boasted about what a clever, good job he'd done. So the Good Friday Agreement was only reached because of the involvement of the most senior politicians, the Prime Ministers in Ireland and in the UK. And this will probably only be resolved if the Prime Minister, for once, goes and does something other than have his photograph taken and tries to sort out a mess that he created.
Right. Wasn't this inevitable, Damien?
Well, there were inevitably going to be difficulties post-Brexit. And the decades have told us there are often difficulties in Northern Ireland and indeed across the island of Ireland. But I repeat what I've said before. The way through these, history has told us, is to talk calmly, not to strike positions that mean intransigence rules. And it can be done. It was done with the Belfast Agreement. It was done with the protocol for all the criticisms people have on it, and we need to do that again.
Right. I mean, I haven't heard yet from you, Ian, although you say it needs to be fixed. What specifically can Edwin Poots, the new leader, actually do? What levers are at his disposal?
Well, this is where I think Margaret has got it absolutely right. This is up to the Prime Minister to move expeditiously, because Edwin doesn't have that many levers up his sleeve, if you like, to do this. What we're relying on now, essentially, is for our society to hold together. But we've seen that it's starting to fray. The North-South relationships are being frayed politically. The East-West relationships are being frayed. The intercommunal tension is rising. We don't have much time. And the Prime Minister has got to intervene, recognise the seriousness of the situation and how he must scalpel-like intervene in this and fix this problem. And he can do it unilaterally. There are mechanisms within the protocol that allows him to do that, to address these issues, and we're appealing to him. There is also a court case, a number of court cases going on, one where the government is being sued for hundreds of millions of pounds for the loss of trade by traders in Northern Ireland and the High Court in England, and another one in Northern Ireland where the courts are testing the legality of it against the Act of Union. So, this is going to get bigger unless the Prime Minister, as Margaret quite rightly says, intervenes immediately and gives it his full undivided attention.
Liam, how do you see it, listening to what Ian Paisley's been saying?
I mean, I think I agree with the wider points that this is a mess that Boris Johnson's making, and we don't see Boris Johnson particularly as a details man, and this is something that he is going to have to give his undivided attention to. I thought it was a little bit interesting in David Frost's piece yesterday that he seemed to be suggesting that the EU was at fault for basically adhering to the rules of a protocol that he obviously agreed to and signed off. He was saying that he wasn't expecting them to sort of put those checks on quite as many goods going through, but that is, I guess, what is involved in the protocol that was agreed. Sort of very much feels like that deal was rushed through in December. As Margaret says, there was a big fanfare around it. Johnson wanted to get it across the table, and we're now starting to see, the cracks in that deal. I guess that the government will be hoping that they can negotiate with the EU now and do this without another treaty, but the noises that we're hearing from the DUP and from Mr. Poots is that's not going to be acceptable to them, and that it's going to be they want to remove it altogether. So it's a massive problem for Boris Johnson now, a massive headache, one that he thought he probably hoped that he had got past, but it looks like this is going to keep going.
Jo, how much do you think it is down to the EU, as David Frost suggests, to be more flexible on this?
It's hard to know, isn't it? I think to some extent there was a bit of they wanted to put our feet to the fire. They wanted to, probably make the point that they had expressed many, many times about how things wouldn't work. They then, perhaps they are going to every letter of the agreement and ensuring that every check is done. Perhaps they're being difficult. Who knows? The problem is we are in a tricky situation that our relations have not exactly been great when you consider what's happened over the vaccination programme. So it's not really an ideal time to be trying to sit down and talk about these issues. But they clearly do need to be got to. We do need people round a table discussing this, and probably as a matter of urgency.
Right, well, Ian, I'm just showing our viewers this BBC News story. Brexit, UK proposes new Irish Sea food checks from October to remind people that to some extent, despite what they've heard, this is the grace period. My colleague John Campbell has seen a roadmap document which says that the UK government is proposing to gradually phase in more checks in the Irish Sea on food products, starting with meat in October and then moving on to dairy products and wine in January. What's your reaction to that?
Well, again, I think people should realise we're not even on the full fat version of the protocol. The full fat version starts to come in from October and then again in January. And if we think we've had chaos for the first 5 months of Northern Ireland, that's nothing of what the future harbours for us. That's why it does need to be fixed immediately. And frankly, reclassifying and bringing in more checks, we currently have more checks going on every day in Northern Ireland than Rotterdam. Let me say it again, more checks in Northern Ireland today than will occur in Rotterdam. That's political point scoring by the EU and by those who want to punish Northern Ireland because the UK decided to pull out of the EU. That's what's happening. Stop punishing us. Stop making Northern Ireland a proxy zone for this war with the EU. It's damaging our economy and our society.
Ian Paisley, thank you very much. We're going to move on and talk about the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting tonight. It's the first since the recent election results. So Sir Keir Starmer will be addressing Labour MPs. I'm presuming, Margaret, you'll be there, virtually or otherwise, as chair of Labour's National Ruling Executive. What would you like Keir Starmer to say? What would you like to hear from him?
I will be there, yes. I want to hear from him what I have heard from him in the past, but not so much in public because, apart from anything else, nobody was listening when the airwaves are all dominated by COVID. But I know he has views and ideas about what the future is, not for the Labour Party so much, but for the country, and what we need to pursue, how we need to make important the issue of jobs, the issue of housing, the issue of social care, all the things that are so important in people's lives. And that if we are beginning to come out of COVID, people will begin to turn their attention to in a way they haven't been willing to do up to now.
Right. Well, there is no shortage of advice, I'm sure you would agree, that you've heard probably on the airwaves and in newspapers, including this from Labour MP and your colleague Yvette Cooper. Let's hear what she had to say.
I think we have not yet set out what a post-Brexit positive Labour vision of Britain actually is. People in our Leave voting areas have never heard what that post-Brexit vision is, have never heard a positive Labour vision of how we can build new partnerships post-Brexit across the world, work with countries in a different way to raise standards rather than leaving them.
That's Keir Starmer's job.
And that's what he's going to have to do.
Margaret, do you agree with that? The idea that the Tory government, as we keep hearing, continually talking about thriving in the post-Brexit world, not just surviving it, citing free ports, the vaccination programme, global trade, etc. Is that what Labour needs to do?
Well, certainly that is what we need to do. And I know that Yvette knows that Keir has been doing that because she was at the meetings that I was at and heard him do it. What it hasn't been happening is it hasn't been happening in a context where the public can see it in the same way that we have seen it, simply because nobody's been listening. There's been no space in the political dialogue. That hopefully will change. And when it does, I'm confident that we shall step forward to meet it.
Right. Is that the limit of it, Liam, that actually Labour, as Margaret is saying, hasn't just had the space to sort of talk about these things? Has Keir Starmer embraced, in the way that Yvette Cooper is encouraging him to do so, a post-Brexit vision?
I think there's an element of that. I mean, I don't think we should lose sight of how difficult it must be to be in opposition in a crisis like this, where you are, short of space to present your ideas. But I think Starmer has to take some of this on the chin himself. We don't really know what he kind of stands for at the moment. I think when he did get elected to the Labour leadership, he was very much talking about bringing some of those progressive policies forward, some of the ones that were perhaps popular with former voters. And we haven't really heard any of that. When you look to the success that Labour's had in these elections, small though it was, in places like Greater Manchester with Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham over here, they are talking about concrete ideas that will improve people's lives, whether that's better housing, better integrated public transport, social care fixes, things like that. And in a post-Brexit world, yes, we need to hear more from Labour in terms of how that will work with the UK on the world stage, because the Conservatives are dominating that conversation at the moment.
Right. Well, Margaret, you say he hasn't had the space to Keir Starmer, but even the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, says she didn't know, or people didn't know, what Keir Starmer stood for. So it's actually within the party itself.
No, I think that's a slight misunderstanding of what Angela's saying. Angela's saying this is a message that has not got across outside the party, and I don't disagree with that at all. And I know that Keir is and will be very conscious of it and wanting to address it.
Right. I mean, Damien, you weren't a fan of Brexit, but is it proving to be a vote winner? Were you wrong?
Well, I'm not going to refight the 2016 referendum campaign. We are where we are now, and the government is rightly saying if you need to make a reality of global Britain. But the Labour Party's problems are not particularly about policy. They're about two things. First of all, if your leader and your deputy leader publicly don't like and don't trust each other, then you've got real problems. But more long term, the problem for Labour, it seems to me as a not very dispassionate outsider, I'm aiming off for that as well. It's about values, not policies. And for most people, a lot of them, including ex-Labour voters, what they hear from the Labour Party is a lot of obsessions of the sort of metropolitan intelligentsia, that Labour seems more concerned with statues and with decrying British history than it does about protecting working people, which is what Labour's self-image is. And until Labour gets over that, then it's got a really systemic long-term problem.
Is that describing you, Margaret?
No, that's straight from the Tory Whip's Office playbook for today. I've seen it repeated in several places. Well done, Damien, for being so on message. You even got the words right.
Damien?
Well, but I'm afraid what we learn from the election results is that whether or not it's what you'd expect a Conservative to say, it's what people and millions of people who used to vote Labour believe. Labour doesn't talk to them anymore. They like Boris Johnson personally, and they like the message of levelling up. And also, incidentally, they liked Brexit. And so, therefore, the Conservative Party is speaking to the vast majority of the British people in a way the Labour Party doesn't. I'm a one nation Conservative, always have been. I am glad we are now speaking to the whole nation. And if Labour wants to get back in the game, it needs to start speaking to the whole nation as well.
Margaret?
I think the picture is a little bit more complicated than that. Liam referred to Andy Burnham and to Steve Rotherham. It's true also in other places where Labour was the incumbency and where we were the people who were showing the capacity to do things, as, for example, in Wales, where our hands are on the levers of power, we have had good results. Where our hands are not on the levers of power and all we can do is talk about things that those who do have the power are doing, then we have lost. And there isn't any dispute about that, I don't think.
Right. Although you lost Hartlepool, of course, which had been Labour. I mean, you mentioned Andy Burnham, just to show you this in the Observer.
We only won Hartlepool in 2019 because of an enormous Brexit vote. Hartlepool was there for the taking. And, you know, I know I don't want to put too much...
Now, come on, Margaret, you and I have been in Parliament a long time. That's an extraordinary statement to make.
No, it's not an extraordinary statement. You looked at the numbers like me. You know we won Hartlepool in 2019 because of the Brexit vote.
I'm just thinking slightly more long term. If you go back 20 years, when it was Peter Mandelson's seat.
The Labour MP for Hartlepool, since then, unfortunately, has been accused of sexual harassment. Now, I know it wasn't featured much in the national news media, but you can bet your bottom dollar nobody in Hartlepool forgot. Was that a good basis on which to fight? I doubt it.
Right, well, let me bring you back to the Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester. Labour's red wall seats, he says in the Observer, would have been safe under me. Do you agree, Margaret?
No, I don't. I mean, I like Andy very much. I voted for him when he last stood in the leadership campaign. I wish he hadn't left Westminster, but he did, and nobody drove him out. It was his choice. But I think that's an uncharacteristically arrogant thing to have said and perhaps a bit unwise.
Liam?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some Labour sources saying today there's a bit of sort of overthinking there, and is he maybe getting a little bit carried away with some of the leadership talk? But you know, I think Andy Burnham's got a very broad appeal. I think, you know, when you see he did that video recently about public transport in Greater Manchester, he's a very effective communicator. He's got, you know, he comes across as a very kind of ordinary bloke, and he's got ideas. And I think that seems to be what the Labour Party is sort of lacking at the moment a little bit. We're just not hearing those ideas for improving people's daily lives. And I think Andy Burnham's got the message right. Margaret's absolutely right. We have to make the point that Andy Burnham is in power in a major conurbation. He can do things and can make these changes. And I think what he is doing is showing that when the Labour Party are in power, they can have some of these progressive ideas. Right. But we need to hear about the national leadership. Right.
Well, Jo, on that issue of incumbency, do you think that is true? As Margaret and Liam have said, where Labour have got their hands on the levers of power, they did better.
I mean, you can see examples of where they did better, but they also had very strong personalities with very good local connections. But I think fundamentally, you know, there is a degree that Labour have lost touch with who their voters are, where their core vote is, and actually not just their core vote, but the ones that lend votes. You know, there's all the talk of how many people lent their votes in 2019 to the Tories. Well, those people are probably the same people that, like myself, have lent their votes to different parties at different times. But I think fundamentally, actually, the Labour Party have just underestimated Boris Johnson. I think you know, there have been a lot of times that the emphasis has been on personal attacks and trying to completely pin everything on him individually. When in reality, if you talk to people, and I don't know what conversations went on the doorsteps in the areas that elections were happening, but I know amongst my own friends and people that I meet when I'm standing on, I don't know, the sidelines watching my son's football games in South London, people would say, well, actually, I don't think they've done a bad job. I don't think Boris has done a bad job. I think he's done the best he could. And actually, they feel slightly connected to that person. They have done often since Brexit. All right. And they therefore don't see themselves switching their vote to
Margaret?
Labour.
I don't think there's any doubt at all that people, let's face it, at any time, but particularly in a pandemic, people want to have confidence in the government of the day, especially when it's not 5 minutes since they elected the government of the day, and they don't want to feel that everything's terrible and so they push to the back of their minds all those failures that led up before we had the vaccination programme, which has been an undoubted, thank goodness, marvellous success.
Thank you. That's all we've got time for, but thank you to all my guests. Bye-bye.